if you want to, so we can.
Wonderful, because I want to keep every minute for Cheryl to be sharing her story and her insights with us. So my name is Kate Diamond, and I am a design director with HDR and a enthusiastic board member of USGBC Los Angeles. And we're really thrilled to have Cheryl Durst with us. And I would like to take this opportunity to tell a somewhat personal story about why I'm really thrilled to be introducing Cheryl among our keynote speakers. I, years ago, was partner with Norma Sklaric. It was Siegel, Sklaric, Diamond. We were the largest women-owned practice in the United States. And Norma was the first ever African-American woman fellow of the AIA and a total superstar in the world of architecture here in Los Angeles. Much of her time with Gruen, time with Siegel, Sklaric, Diamond, and then time with Dirty Partnership. She was a mentor and a critical part of my connection to architecture. But I have learned, particularly as we explore these crazy times, that the best gift she left me was the connection to a professional network of amazing African-American architects, both in private practice and at HBCUs, and an opportunity to stay connected in ways that I never would have if my career path hadn't connected with her. And when we talk about inclusion and we talk about diversity, we need those personal and amazing connections so that we reach out and we include other voices in the conversation. It is extraordinarily important that IIDA, the International Interior Design Association, has a Black woman as the Executive Vice President and Chief Executive Officer. It is amazing that she represents and supports 15,000 members working in 58 countries. It gives a complete change to the perspective of the profession, and I can't wait to learn more from her. Cheryl, I know you have a longer list of things I could add, but I'd really like to leave the time for you. So thank you, and can't wait to hear what you have to share.
Thanks so much, Kate. I'm so honored to be with you all, to be in a Zoom room with everyone, and I am going to get started and share my screen. Got some images here. All right. Presentation mode. And I'm hoping everybody is seeing my screen. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about equity, justice, design, and environmental integrity. In 1969, when I was 7 years old, Amy Pietrzakowski called me the N-word. And she didn't leave it at that. She added some geographic specificity to her name calling. She called me the N-word, lived on the other side of the tracks. I went home and I told my mother, and the first thing that I asked was not about the racial slur. My parents had prepared me from the age of 4 to be called that particular name. But I had not been prepared to be told that something was wrong with my neighborhood. In fact, I had never noticed that anything was wrong with my neighborhood until Amy used the words wrong and tracks. And sure, there was a nightclub, liquor store on the corner, but it happened to be where the Black Panthers gathered. They taught activism by day and kept the neighborhood safe. Remember, it's 1969. And that barbershop on the corner, it was where the Panthers kept their impressive afros shaped up. It was where my father and my uncles and all the men in the neighborhood gathered to look good and feel pride and to share knowledge. It was actually where I met Angela Davis, who scandalized and intrigued all the older Black men who had never met a woman with the audacity to set foot in a barbershop, let alone have her impressive afro shaped and perfected. It was also where my father had held long philosophical conversations with the author James Baldwin whenever he stopped in. And sure, there was a gritty, sooty factory on the other end of the block. Its workforce had been integrated 5 years before, and now it employed the Black and brown men of my neighborhood. I watched my uncle carry his vintage red, black, and steel lunchbox and thermos with pride to the union job that enabled college educations for his children, my cousins. And those tracks that Amy sneered at, the sound of those night trains are amongst my earliest memories. The soothing rhythm and the syncopation was like a lullaby for me. The bells and the whistles and the conductor calls live in my imagination and elicited a very early love of travel and adventure and curiosity about places unknown. Yet Amy's othering of my neighborhood did make me question my mother why there were so many for sale signs that were appearing in the yards of our white neighbors. Remember, it's 1969. In that short span of time, from the 60s until now, I've seen my descriptors change. My mother and father's birth certificates said colored. Mine said Negro. By the time I was in the 4th and 5th grade, the terminology used was Afro-American. And then I became Black, and then African-American. And frequently, now we hear person of color. All factors of identity and nomenclature and designation and descent and heritage. But so is place. Place matters. Place determines who we are and our view of the world and what we believe the world thinks of us. Place matters in 1969, and place matters now. You know, as we have this conversation about eradicating injustice and systemic racism, we need to also remember that environmental racism must be addressed and eradicated as well. Racism suffuses nearly every system and institution in the US. And as we're living through this COVID-19 crisis, it has particularly highlighted and magnified that racial inequity and inequality, as it has with so many other injustices that existed before the pandemic. We can look at a lot of demographic data, and particularly about COVID-19, and we clearly see that the Black community and communities of color across the country have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic, both contracting and dying from the disease at rates far out of proportion. Recent findings about the effects of COVID-19 on the human body and how it spreads are highlighting another reason that Black Americans are at risk: environmental racism. The interlocking harms of environmental racism and residential segregation, the health effects of these systems, and the particular way that COVID-19 spreads and affects individuals are combining to contribute to racial disparities. Environmental racism particularly refers to the many ways that communities of color in the United States, Black communities in particular, face greater harm from environmental factors. The term, which was first articulated in studies of waste disposal, toxic dumping, and industrial usage, is now understood to encompass everything from the string of increased industrial use to proximity to power plants and factories, to higher exposure to emissions from mobile sources of pollution like cars, trucks, and ships, and to the disproportionate harm that disasters like Hurricane Katrina do to Black communities. So we talk about diversity in really broad terms, and I'm sharing these images because I don't ever want any of you to use these images when you talk about diversity.
Oh, Cheryl, I
But,
hate to interrupt you, but we
yeah.
can't see images right now. I'm so sorry. So maybe
Oh
try.
no,
Just wanted to reference before.
I am so sorry.
No, it's totally. I just wanted. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I also, when you reference an image, I wanted to make sure that we got.
Yeah, let me try. I tell you let's see, let me try. Let's try share screen again.
Now we got you.
Okay, you got it? Oh my goodness.
Thank you, Cheryl. I
Okay.
appreciate it. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
Sure,
you.
no, I am so appreciative that you interrupted me.
You were on a roll either way, Cheryl, for what it's worth. You were doing a great job.
You were.
Oh my goodness. All right, well, I want to back up and
These are gorgeous slides.
you didn't get to see the cute one of me when I was 7 years old. So I love to show this slide because I don't ever want us using these fake images about what diversity is and how we talk about diversity, particularly in the context of environmental justice. Even the phrase, let us breathe, let me breathe, didn't originate with George Floyd. There have been symposia and a consortium of Black moms put together a program on Juneteenth called Let Us Breathe, because the effects of climate and climate change in the African American community for decades has not allowed people of color to breathe. We need to be clear on terminology and the words that we use. If we aren't clear on the words and the ideas, how will we be clear on the solutions? And when we talk about equity, we need to understand that equity is a process that begins by acknowledging an unequal starting place. So let's think about this. We talk about diversity, but diversity is in fact an outcome. Inclusion is also an outcome. Equity isn't an outcome. It refers to the process a company, a culture, an organization consistently engages in to ensure that people with marginalized identities have the opportunity to grow, contribute, and develop, regardless of their identity. You know, neighborhoods with large non-white populations have historically seen lower property values, meaning that land in those areas is cheaper to acquire, and it obviously leads to greater pollution because the industrial actors, as we say, have moved into those neighborhoods. At the same time, policy choices have acted alongside financial factors to drive dangerous uses towards communities of color and away from wealthier, whiter neighborhoods. And that's all thanks to, as we all know, an imbalance in political power. The harms of emissions, such as cars and trucks, have been concentrated in these communities of color with less political power to resist them. We know that the siting of freeways and shipping centers, for example, you have the confluence of white flight and the concentration of Black communities in inner cities, and the construction of freeways explicitly designed to serve suburban communities break up inner city slums. Even where these trends have mutated or shifted direction recently, there still is continuous environmental harm. This cycle is perpetuated as existing pollution and industrial land use keeps property values low, preventing people of color from building wealth and power through property ownership. Hashtag the American dream. Ownership is wherewithal. Ownership is agency. These environmental factors are used as justification alongside well-documented reasons like school quality and quality of life for white-dominated political systems and individuals to avoid integrating non-white neighborhoods. Communities of color then therefore end up in concentrated areas that face greater environmental harm and are more vulnerable to natural disasters. And the forces of residential segregation again contribute to these systemic barriers that make it more difficult for individuals to move to less environmentally harmful areas. Outrage indeed. I will completely out myself as an angry Black woman, but I'm not the only one who is angry. We know, thanks to this quote by Benjamin Franklin, that it's widespread. Black women aren't the only ones who are angry now. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. Environmental justice demands intention. It demands conscious decisions. It demands us to realize our history that includes racial covenants to redlining, to municipal secession and exclusionary zoning, and of political leaders who uphold those systems rather than confronting them. Though the placement of polluting facilities is more traditionally thought of as the marketplace at work, this too is the result of policy choices. It's why we in the environmental community and the design community must become increasingly activist. We're protecting our identity as humanity and the identity of people of color. What is going to be important now and what's going to be important next? I have the privilege of belonging to an organization called the World Future Society. And every year, that organization identifies keywords that surround the culture and words that impend what will be next. And according to the World Future Society, these 12 words will be what matter: empathy, optimism, resilience, wellness, civility, purpose, equity, justice, humanity, inclusion, community, and courage. We all require this stepping outside of our bubbles and our boundaries. We all require the activist nature that's inherent in the design community. I almost think sometimes that design is synonymous with activism. There is a tide that has been turned. And did it start with George Floyd? I don't think so. Did it start with the civil rights movement of the 60s and that little girl that was called the N-word who lived on the other side of the tracks? I don't think so. It started long, long before that. It started when we realized our network of partnership and stewardship with nature and the environment around us. There's a phrase that I like to use within the context of IIDA, that design is important because chaos is so very hard. We're living through such a period of chaos and volatility now that it requires all of us: designer, architect, facility manager, space planner, real estate broker, environmental attorney, all of us to use our design thinking skills to eradicate environmental inequities and environmental racism. Design, like place, will always matter. Stewardship matters as well, and our caretaking of the environment requires us to be the utmost stewards. My call to action: I know that the world that I live in looks at me and defines me sometimes by my physical aspect, but I also know that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. The photo that you see is my great-great-grandmother, who was born a slave and became a suffragette and worked hard for her right to live, to work, to pray, and to vote. I encourage all of us to not only be good stewards, but to be good ancestors. My mantra has always been, with regard to equity, that you can't design for the world if you're not of the world. Let's all be of the world, share the world, protect the world, and make it safe for each and every one of us, safe and equitable. Thank you so very much for your time this afternoon. Be safe, be strong, be resilient. I wish you all the best.
I don't know where we are in our program and whether there's time for Cheryl to take a couple of questions. I saw that there was one specifically on the questions for those of us, and we started the morning with a keynote speaker saying, I am a white privileged woman and I have so much to learn. What images should we be using for diversity? What are the proper images? And you show us some examples of those that you don't think are. Talk to us about what we can do and how we can do that. And then this was a great presentation and really excited.
You know, imagery, Kate, like narrative, matter. And I think, particularly with people of color, acknowledging that we aren't homogenous. I don't speak for all Black people. I don't speak for all Black women over the age of 50 with gray hair. I think it's understanding that we each have a unique, significant, and particular point of view that can be shared. And I think acknowledging the voices and the faces in the room. And I think a lot of what has happened as of late is the right faces and voices have not been in the room. We can't just stand on one set of thought and one set of opinion or one viewpoint of Western civilization. This acknowledgement of all, or as many as possible, is what we really need to focus on.
Does anyone else have a critical question? The weaving of place and voice and kind of identity together was really powerful, Cheryl. So anyone else have questions?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Can.
absolutely.
Okay. We are currently in the process of working with our real estate clients that have large real estate portfolios and they own a lot of properties. I think everybody's, the diversity and inclusion topics and the kind of in everyone's minds. And we're in the process of working with them on creating diversity and inclusion guides and policies and programs. And a lot of our clients are asking for, guidance and suggestions like, what would you suggest for an organization that's trying to improve their diversity and inclusion programs? What are the suggestions or recommendations that you'd make to help those companies kind of be more diverse and be more inclusive?
So that's a great question, Danielle. And I would start first with asking the organization to look inward and to ask the question, what's missing? What point of view are we not considering? And whether it is an AEC firm or whether it's an educational institution or whether it's a not-for-profit, in attracting talent, representation matters, as does visual representation. And sometimes, and I don't want to oversimplify, but I am going to use the phrase, it may be as simple as thinking about where that institution is recruiting talent from. Are you recruiting from HBCUs? Are you investing in pipeline programs? Are you status quo doesn't work anymore. And looking at where you're attracting your talent, looking at something as simple as I participated in a program for a design firm, And a young lady, a woman of color, mentioned that she was not going to interview with a particular design firm. She happened to look at their website and saw no one that looked like her. There is a great deal of security, comfort, reinforcement, and collegiality in seeing yourself reflected in a place that you want to be. I would encourage everyone to not ignore the power of representation. And for young men and women of color to see on your social media, on your website, to see themselves reflected and not just see a made up marketing statement about diversity. Because at the end of the day, those words don't matter, but supporting people of color in your organization does matter.
Those are really good points. Thank you.
You're quite welcome.
So someone says that her microphone isn't working, so I'll read her question, which is, do you work with diverse emerging contemporary artists to design spaces with local voices? Or do you, I guess I would translate that to, do you recommend it, and how does one find them?
I would absolutely recommend it. I am fortunate to be on the board of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, which has a great viewpoint on artists of color and also designers of color. I think looking outside of your comfort zone, there are Black and brown artists and designers and architects that are doing phenomenal work. There are organizations like NOMA, the National Organization of Minority Architects, organizations like IIDA. Sometimes it means just looking a bit harder to find that representation and finding the talent within community of color. I can assure you we are out there and we exist. If you want to reach out to me personally, I can certainly help you with that as well.
And speaking of which, Cheryl, you presently still are sharing your screen. I think by now, I know I have clipped it so that I would have your contact information. But if you could, I'm sure we'd love to see you full screen here.
All right.
And Patty,
my Zoom skills are failing me at the moment. And I'm so sorry.
Patty asked a question. Patty, do you want to just unmute yourself and ask it directly? As a Latina, I hear Black, Indigenous, people of color troubled by the impact of the lack of executives being Black, Indigenous, people of color versus having them in support roles. That creates a sort of savior mentality in the workplace. And I really hope that we can get more into leadership. So can you talk to the challenge to leadership?
Ooh, that's a lot. But yes, and I just reshared, I hope, successfully my screen with my contact information. The leadership piece is huge. And I think for people of color who are in current leadership positions, it is incumbent on us to nurture, mentor, and support the next generation of leaders. Kate mentioned in her introduction a really important, albeit 80 sounding word, network. It's a noun and it's a verb, and it is a hella skill that we all need to have. And it's not just up to people of color to mentor other people of color. It's incumbent on all of us to mentor. I think it's become a lost art, and particularly those in leadership positions, it needs to be a part of our portfolio of skills. And that means mentoring at all levels. You don't mentor down, you mentor laterally. And I look to younger not-for-profit executives to teach me and keep me relevant. I just can't tell you enough to continue to reach out and expand your personal network and your professional network. And remember that your network does not necessarily need to look like you, think like you, or act like you.
I think that other than seeing exactly what we were hoping would happen here, which is someone saying, that they're looking for a Black, Indigenous person of color to bid on a project for the renovation of a large condo high-rise in a common area. And where do they look? The answer is we all need, it's not easy to always find that. I spend an enormous amount of time looking for viable, qualified small business owners with great experience. How do we help grow them? How do we help create them? Here in California, we kind of killed affirmative action. Time for us to think about a better, smarter way to put that back in place. And I think we're going to have an electoral opportunity to do that. But it's really hard. You got to work at it.
And Kate, also the notion of probably affirmative action and the very phrase itself probably could stand for some rebranding, some wordsmithing. It has such negative connotations. I think the original intentions were good, but it has become synonymous with hiring for the sake of hiring without considering talent, viability, all the things that we focus on from a business and economic perspective. And so that needs work as well.
Absolutely.
Some retooling.
I can tell you that we had the most amazing student intern from Prairie View A&M, which is one of the Black historic college and universities in Texas. And she and her team were the grand prize winners in the solar decathlon. There was no compromise in hiring her. She was the best of the best. Yeah. And that's when you are truly affirmatively opening doors and creating opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's incumbent on all of us, right? We all need to, as you and I were talking about earlier, we all need to do the work. And I don't know that there's a finite end to it. It's continuous, but being mindful and intentional, and again, being a steward of humanity as much as we are a steward of the environment will be critical to our shared future.
Which seems to me to be probably a perfect place to end, and to thank you again. Very inspiring, a pleasure to meet you. Can't wait to see where you go and what you do and how we all make a better place. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kate, and thanks so much to everybody. And my apologies for the Zoom fluff up. It happens. But take care, everyone. Be strong, be healthy.
Thank you, Cheryl. And thank you, Kate, as well.